Yes, thank you so much, Ryan. And yeah, the first correction to my slide obviously is the CBDC has to go with the stable coin. But the concept actually comes from discussions with other countries as well as specifically the Maldives, which has a central bank, and also other countries that we're working with at this point. So what I want to do is actually kind of bridge a little bit the two topics or the two big realms that we're talking about this morning. A lot about currencies, about digital currencies and the possibilities of blockchain. Tomorrow we're going to have a lot of conversation about the tokenization, and specifically also the question of sustainability and how the interaction between the blockchain world and the sustainability, let's say the carbon, blue-green carbon world works. And this is what my talk's about. I want to paint a little bit of a vision for you that is bringing in this also the question of sovereignty for Palau, in the sense that my thesis is, I'm going to say this right up front, is that you are sitting or standing on incredible wealth right now. And I think intuitively this is already being recognized quite seriously by the Palauan people and the Palauan government, namely the natural assets that you have, and you're protecting them, you're stewarding them in a very admirable way. Now the question becomes, in terms of diversification, as His Excellency the President mentioned this morning, diversifying the economy into other fields, there is a big value to be unlocked in those assets. And I think that I want to talk about this today with you and take you on that little journey and see how where we can go. Yeah, it doesn't look like we can go anywhere. That way I can advance this slides. On the right. Yeah, so I hit me in. Press the receiver. Yeah, receiver. Pointed to what? Okay, well, can I just ask for the next slide? Manual input, okay. Fantastic. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, why is there so much value now? Maybe as opposed to a couple of years ago. Don't actually read this, because I know I shouldn't do the text and slides and we discuss this. I know, but I'll distribute those to you. So this is basically your note space, right? So you don't have to take notes. So why is there so much value now locked into an ecosystem? So as we are in the 21st century, we're basically running up to planetary boundaries. I'm not going to go through the whole industrialization history, but at least since 1971, when we read, well, not me, but our previous generation read the report by the called the Rome, saying we're running up against certain planetary boundaries. And now we are actually experiencing that in terms of multiple crises, in terms of global climate change, and also in terms of biodiversity loss, etc. So we are in a situation where an intact nature and intact ecosystems have become increasingly valuable as an asset, right? And this has really changed the landscape. Another thing that has changed the landscape is that not only are we intellectually aware of this, we have also started to establish global mechanisms that are attempting to deal with this, right? At least in terms of climate, we have a bunch of international agreements, commitments by nations to go into reducing greenhouse gases, into increasing biodiversity. I'm mentioning this because those mechanisms are going to be really important when we talk about how we can access that value that is stored right now inside of your functioning and well-protected ecosystem. So these are the points essentially I want to bring up before I actually go into the topic, because it's important to frame that properly. And the last point I want to mention is that technology now has reached a point where we actually can unlock these things using technology in a safe and reproducible way. And I'm talking obviously about blockchain technology coupled with IoT, coupled with satellites, etc. So I want to add another concept here that's really, really important because it drives essentially the whole idea of behind the value in ecosystem services such as Palau. So, and most of you will be familiar with this if you have taken any economics 101 class. You will notice. So any activity, any industrial or any activity, in fact, whatsoever that you undertake has a direct goal and you're working for that. This is going to be on your balance sheet, but it also produces some side effects that you not necessarily have on your balance sheet. Like, for instance, if you're driving a car, you produce a certain amount of noise and pollution, and you're not necessarily paying for this, what you're doing there. Some of it is taxed, some of it is offset, but not everything. So these will be typically externalities. They don't go on your balance sheet. They kind of are pushed off on the balance sheet of society and nature. Vice versa, you also have positive externalities. Like if you start planting a lot of trees in your garden, that is a great thing for yourself, but you also have side effects that are positive. And typically those positive externalities aren't valued either. So you're not actually getting money for what you're doing here. And that's this concept of having a price tag on externalities, both negative and positive, is the driver behind how you can value ecosystem services in a coherent manner and in a logical manner. And that's at the heart of this concept here. The tragedy of the commons basically is that what I mentioned before is, as we're running up against the planetary boundaries, essentially we are too many, we are too fast, and we are producing now too much stuff that goes through this cycle of extraction from the ground, turning that into material goods and then turning it into trash, essentially. So that's kind of the cycle we're looking at. That worked really well when we were 500 million people and the planet was really big. Now we have an entire, we have the global south coming, fortunately, into a situation where, out of poverty into middle classes, and that just produces an even bigger footprint. We have essentially industrial growth is dependent on actually exploiting those resources. So here's our dilemma, and as these goods, namely clean air, clean water, etc., were free, we had just used them, and now we're in a different situation. But that really drives the value game. So a lot of the attempts to help to sort of get ourselves back into a survival situation where we can actually survive this and prosper as a planet are based on nature-based solutions, on nature capital. So the question here becomes not only how can we stop polluting, but actually how can we align the economic incentives correctly so that we're not just forbidding people from polluting or punishing people from polluting. In fact, how can we create economic incentives that are aligning planetary goals, SDGs, whatever you want to call them, with economics properly? So if we're looking at how do we establish this value? When we look at the concept of ecosystem services, and I just quickly explain what that is. So and how important it is. Ecosystem services are essentially the entirety of the positive outcomes from an ecosystem simply existing and being protected and being in its natural state. That is one thing, is obviously carbon sequestration, but of course there is other benefits, such as in the case of trees, filtering the air, retaining water in the soil, improving soil quality. In case of marine ecosystems, it's definitely biodiversity, blue carbon, and also providing fish and food actually for many ecosystem chains, right? Food chains here. So what it means is that functioning ecosystems are fundamental to planetary survival, to our actual existence, and are responsible directly or indirectly for more than 50% of global GDP. So this is absolutely not something we can ignore, even if we were to reduce and extract all the carbon from the air right now. We will still need to work with biodiversity and make sure that this is also protected. So, and Palau here has an incredible role to play and has an exemplary function, obviously. Now, how? I'm sorry, I'm not going to go through this. This is just to scare you a little bit. About how to actually value this, right? So I talked about how important it is, but like, how do you actually value this in now concrete terms for an economy like Palau? So there are many models on how to do this. Here's a total economic value model. There's other kind of legacy models that are looking at basically how much can you sell a tree for, how much can you sell something for, plus some perceived value. But we have advanced since then, and here's just a screenshot of an article that one of our advisors, Mr. Ralph Chami, has written, and he became kind of famous because he has established sort of the value of certain species. So if we were, for instance, whales and elephants, so for instance, if we were to pay a whale a salary for the individual's contribution to our planet, that would be around $2 million over the lifetime of this of the animal, right? So and these are not just figures that are coming from thin air. That's actually scientifically and peer-reviewed literature. So this is establishing the value, the ecosystem value here of individual species. But of course, you can do the same thing for entire ecosystems, right? So the many whales, including all their food chains, etc. And now you're starting to understand that the value of a living animal, in this case the whale, is way higher than what you could technically sell that whale for. Or in other words, if you have a tree that's a living tree, the value of that tree is way higher as a living tree than what you could sell the timber for. So that concept now starts to make sense when I said before, okay, how can we align economic incentives with the goals that we actually have? If we are able to establish the value of those services, then we can start, okay, time's up, I guess. So, can we restart this thing?
You're good. It's still over there. Let's do over there.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I've been sort of left brain a little bit anyway, so I'm gonna go on this side here. So then we can establish if we can reliably establish that value, we can start now kind of crowding out extractive, destructive types of economic activity in favor of more profitable economic activity when we are actually creating this economic value. Now, I'm going to try and go into two things that we need to do in order to do that. And so we're going to use the blockchain, obviously, to do that, to record that value. But also we have to measure it. So let's say we're happy with the methodology. I mean, that's a seminar in itself. We're not going to go into this, but let's say we have established a consensus on the methodology on how to value this, like the whale, $2 million, right? We say like a coral reef, such and such amount. Okay, so we established this. Then the next thing we need to do is we need to measure it, right, physically. Now we're going to get into the actual thing. This is not just a vision; it's something that can actually happen today. So we can we're going to have to measure this and. This is what's usually called monitoring, reporting, verification, MRV in this space, and many of you guys will be familiar with this. One thing I want to say here is we're all very happy and excited about the blockchain, but blockchain itself cannot really create trust. It can transport trust really well, but we have to establish it at the beginning. When we bring something on chain, it has to be trustworthy already, whether it's an identity or in this case, the value of an ecosystem. Here, what you see here is an infrared satellite that is measuring the addition of biomass in a forest. And Trying. Can you advance the slide, please? Oh, there's another, yeah, perfect. And so what we are doing here, and this is concretely what's actually happening. So what we're doing is basically we're taking those measuring points, in this case also satellite, or or sediment measures of sediment profile imagery for typically for the Palau application, that would be great, or EPNA, whatever it might be. We're taking those measurements, we're making sure that we cross-reference it, and then we create a secure digital asset based directly on those measurements, right? And that means we have now created an asset that lives on the blockchain, that has a secure origination that is mostly technology-based, but can also be based on traditional, ancient stewardship techniques, right? It doesn't have to be exclusively technology. It can live together with what has been happening specifically in Palau or other island nations already for centuries. So this can be fused together to create those kinds of assets. Can I go to the next slide? Yeah, well, no, it works. So I'm not going to go through this. This is something if you have questions, but here's the okay, so how much? What's the value? And so I've done a little bit of research, and this is not the first time we're doing this. So there's always a survey and a scoping, etc. And what usually comes out are very, very high numbers. And I'm presenting this here not because I want to say this is realistically what you're going to get in cash, but it gives you an idea of, if you're taking this seriously and you're taking a serious scientific methodology, economic methodology, you are getting into very high numbers. And we're talking about this per year. This is not something that's like an established, it's not a mineral deposit. These are services. So these are, they're based on a natural capital, but these are services. So I want to caution, of course, against taking this at face value directly in this sense, but it gives you an idea of the order of magnitude that if we're able to bring that into an international context, and if we're able to value this inside of existing frameworks or new frameworks, such as the Paris Agreement, we can actually get to very, very substantial numbers. And this is why we believe that not only can this generate revenue directly, but it can also back, let's say, a stable coin in terms of value. And if we're talking about backing this, and by the way, this is not a new concept, right? So the idea of natural capital accounts is around for more than 10 years, and is well documented as well. This is not new stuff per se, right? So if we're talking about backing a national stable coin, a national currency with your own national assets, in the same thinking of what you already are doing in terms of protecting your environment, we're getting to a point where we say, here's a nationally centered, sovereign way of backing your national currency or your national assets, however they're configured, in this case with the stable coin. But we're talking about something quite substantial, and this could be a real shift in how things are sorted out. So again, here's how this would work. I will share this slide. So this is something just to kind of look into. Just a last point here, this is kind of, I'm sort of anticipating a question here. So how could we extract liquidity against that, right? You can say like, yeah, cool. I mean, so you have $50 billion a year like you're sitting on, but how can you can you extract some actual liquidity from that? So in the Paris Article 6.2, or this is kind of like a much talked about piece in the industry, it is possible to trade between countries. So let's say Canada doesn't meet their CO2, their greenhouse gas reduction goals. Well, they can go to Palau and say, hey, could you sell some of your excess wealth that your blue carbon in this case, and we will pay you with Canadian dollars or US dollars in exchange. So this is how this can potentially work, and this is based on international frameworks and bilateral agreements. This is all agreed on. Tangible benefits of this, and this is my last slide here. We have this, as I mentioned, this obvious connection between your national natural treasure and your national capital accounts. You can reduce your cost of capital on the international debt markets, and intact ecosystems become truly more valuable than exploited ecosystems. In fact, protection is now economically viable and profitable beyond just tourism, tourism is just like one piece of an ecosystem service, right? But there's much, much more than that. It can be implemented very fast. The technology is here, the frameworks are here, and the expertise is here. So this is your summary, and we will definitely share the slides so you can read out on this. And I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to some questions.
Thank you, Christoph, for sharing this very exciting talk about Palau's natural resources, tokenizing it, and also to train the natural resources. So now we would like to have 2 questions from the audience. Of course, Christoph will be here for the whole weekend. You can just, this is him, we can ask him anytime. But anybody has questions with this CBDC questions.
Ask me over lunch or during the breaks, and yeah, let's see how we can implement that for Palau.